From being called a lousy actor during auditions some 30 years ago to reprising that very role for a total of 23 years, the world will remember Richard Belzer as Detective John Munch. And just as was expected of the guy who embodied Munch for over 20 years, the actor had a few choice words to leave behind on his deathbed. Now, before I reveal the words Belzer believed were befitting enough to be his very last, I need you to understand the sort of person the stand-up comedian was. For starters, he was just that, a comedian. But you wouldn't know that from his role as Detective Munch, mostly because the role, the premise of the show, and all of that required Belzer to don a more serious character. But at heart, he was always the guy who'd make people laugh. In fact, a longtime friend and fellow comedian, Lorraine Newman, called him one of the funniest people ever. And Lorraine's pretty funny herself, so that's a tall order. The fact is, even though Homicide, Life on the Street, and Law & Order Special Victims Unit were shows that had more serious undertones, and Detective Munch was written into the show as a wisecracking cynic.
Teamwork and his hostility toward unnamed quote-unquote enemies whom he believes are preventing him from being hired by the fire department. Police! Down! Get down! Damn it! Get down!
John!
Belzer tried his best to sprinkle in a little comedy every now and then. In fact, being the resident funny man was what got him the role in the first place. Now, Barry Levinson, the executive producer for Homicide, has been pretty vocal about the fact that he made Belzer go back and reread the script for a second and then a third time. In fact, he called him a lousy actor. 23 years as one of the most well-known television cops isn't a job for a lousy actor. And you might think Levinson was being overtly harsh, or if anything, why make him read for the part over and over again if he was that bad? The truth is, Levinson had always wanted Belzer to be the one to play Munch. The producer spotted Belzer on a taping for the Howard Stern show, and he knew right then and there that this was the guy he wanted to play one of the most important characters on his show. And he did, for 23 years without fail. Belzer actually had announced his retirement in 2014, but returned for a special episode of SVU in 2016, before leaving the show in the hands of his younger castmates.
Where's the guy who's cooking up bombs in the kitchen sink while writing his insipid missives?
They can test for that.
Insipid writing?
Sort of sulfury.
Nothing smells like black powder.
So that's on establishing the person Belzer was. It gives more context to his last words now. Bill Sheft was by the veteran actor's side when he breathed his last. The writer and longtime friend claimed that Belzer was suffering from many health issues. The official cause of death is yet to be announced, but doctors were treating the actor for several pulmonary and cardiac conditions. So suffice it to say, Belzer's time was near, and according to Sheft, it was no laughing matter. But leave it to Richard Belzer to find the comedy in everything. Even death, or rather, especially death. His last words were, "F you, mother." Not the sort of words you'd expect to hear from a 78-year-old man who's dying, right? But this wasn't some ordinary 78-year-old guy. This was Belzer. And Sheft likes to think these words are befitting to be his very last. It immortalizes the sort of person he was. I mean, this wouldn't be the first time he's made light of a deadly situation. After all, nearly getting killed is what got him a house in France. I know how that sounds. Horrible. But that's actually how Belzer described it himself. Let me set the stage for you on this one.
I'm not clowning around. Please don't make me frown. Won't you be mine? My sweet Valentine, if it isn't you, I don't know what I'll do. Application denied.
Narcissistic, paranoid, fascinated with fire. We've hit the trifecta.
So, Belzer's invited the management and cast from WrestleMania onto his show. That's Vince McMahon, Hulk Hogan, and Mr. T on Hot Properties. After asking Hogan repeatedly to show him some of his signature moves, the 6'8", 300-pound Hogan placed the 6'1", 150-pound Belzer in a front chin lock. And, as was expected, Belzer passed out. When the wrestler released him, he fell to the floor, he hit his head, and got a scar to remember the day with. Also, he got a house to commemorate nearly dying with. Basically, Belzer decided to sue WrestleMania for nearly killing him and wanted $5 million. But Hogan's attorneys made an out-of-court settlement with Belzer's legal team, and the whole thing was put to bed with $400,000. Just about enough money for Belzer and his wife to buy a home in France, which he and his wife variously dubbed Shea Hogan and the Hulk Hogan estate. Belzer is survived by his wife of over 40 years, Harley McBride, his two stepdaughters, and the entire cast of Homicide and SVU. you. Which reminds me, prepare to tear up, because some heartwarming tributes from Belzer's former castmates are up. The role of Detective Munch is a lot bigger than one series. Munch's career kick-started in Homicide, but between the 7 seasons that he appeared as a series regular, on almost every episode of the show, he made notable appearances as the character on multiple other television shows, as the conspiracy theorist we all grew to love, of course. My favorite would have to be his crossover in The X-Files. So, in the 23 years since he's held the role, Belzer actually appeared on 10 television programs as Detective John Munch, and obviously, he's left behind a huge grieving family of television star. Mariska Hargitay uploaded an image of herself alongside Belzer on Instagram the day after the actor passed away. She captioned the adorable picture with, "I'll miss you and your singular take on life." Ice-T, the man who played Belzer's partner on television for close to a decade, posted an image of himself with the man, and he captioned it with a direct quote from Munch himself. Christopher Maloney claimed that Belzer's last words made his passing easier to take. By that, he meant that knowing that the veteran comedian found a way to be happy in spite of his ailing condition ensured everyone that he was ready and that he wanted to be remembered in laughter and not in tears.
That's all 3 floors. You want suits?
I'm wearing a suit.
Smart man.
Okay, have a nice day.
Which just makes everyone cry tears of happiness. It wouldn't be fair to Belzer's memory if I ended the video here. So, here's another hilarious incident from the actor's life. Almost all of us have grown up watching Richard Belzer on our screens, but did you know that the actor initially had a pretty hard time bagging roles? And while recounting that time period of his life years later for interviews, Belzer was sure to recount the single incident which made him feel like he'd really hit rock bottom. But it's not as bad as it sounds, because Belzer believed it was one of the most endearing things about him. So, when the rest of his castmates had moved on to bigger and better roles after the Groove Project, Belzer found himself desperate enough to take on any and every role he could, which included being the celebrity guest star in a salacious game show called Everything Goes. And if the name didn't already set the premise for what the show was about, basically, a group of contestants has to identify one another based on the other's body parts. That sounds harmless? Hold that thought. The woman had to make the other contestants guess by poking their naked breasts through cardboard cutouts, and the men would poke their bare buttocks through cardboard cutouts. Belzer, fortunately, only appeared for one taping of the game show, and just as the camera goes from zooming in on the contestants doing whatever it was that they were doing, it pans to Belzer, who mouths the words, "I did it for the money," before rolling credits. And that's all on Richard Belzer's passing, his last words, and the memories he's left behind.
Guy loves this.
I hate it.
So, who's the man going to ask out?
I don't think it matters.
Oh, but it does.
Oh, I'm sure she did, but not the way you mean. She grew, changed, used her misfortune to help other women.